We'll do a little bit of an audio visualization. I'll just show you what we'll end up with. So that always happens to me. I usually work on a black background. I just going to show you what we'll build, because we will build this from the ground up.
So just now looking at
And what you see here is like we will be using an audio file to play audio, and we'll be using this to animate a particle system. As you can see here is the particle sub, and we'll render that out and apply a couple of compositing effects, and that's pretty much all that does. Yeah, in basis, it's just using what you heard previously from Ben and Greg, and this is kind of like recipes how to do certain things, because TouchDesigner is also all about recipes. Like you have a problem, you figure out how it goes, and then you know how that works, and you're probably going to use it over and over again. So maybe you start by opening up a new TouchDesigner or just a new file. Make a new, fresh file. You can do this with new, I guess. Continue. Yeah. Right, and maybe we'll just save this file, save as, and we'll put it also. We'll just fill up this folder in the workshop 2016-01 Norway, and I'll call it audio viz, but you are free to call it whatever you like.
Good.
Now if you press Ctrl S again while you work, it counts up automatically, so you don't have to worry about the name anymore. I should leave open this one though, because I'm going to come back to it. Oh, I want to show you one thing about this file here. A little bit of the features. What we wanted to do here is actually that we're using the left and the right channel to animate the whole thing, and have and we'll have it such way that we have the left channel and the right channel actually on the left and the right side. And yeah, that's pretty much, that's what I forgot to say earlier. But all right, fresh file. So the basis of this whole thing is a particle system, and we looked at the particle system shortly with Ben. What we also saw was that the particle system, when you put the node down, it comes up with an error because it doesn't function by itself. It's a node. If you look, yes, a sub particle system, because the particle system is a surface operator. You will find it in the subsection of the create dialog. I often, by the way, use tab as well to bring this up. So if you type particle and create that, you end up with a particle sub that has a big arrow mark in the corner. And middle mouse clicking tells you that there's not enough sources specified. Early on, Ben also mentioned, and this is a good indication for this, when you open up the create dialog, that you have the light colored nodes and the darker colored nodes. The light colors are filters, so they will require an input, while the darker colors are the generators, which don't need an input. They can have an input, but they don't need an input. So if you look there, the particle, I'm blind, oh here, the particle sub actually is a light colored node and therefore needs an input. And this input is basically the emitter. Like the particle system always works with something that emits particles. So for our purpose, what you saw was a circular thing. So probably the best thing to choose is, or to start off with, is a circle. So I'll hit tab and look for my circle. that's what you, by the way, you can do this also if you hit tab and start typing and there's only circle is the one node lit up. If you now hit enter, it also creates the circle, so you don't have to really search for it. If you now move over your mouse over the inputs of the particle sub, you also can see what kind of inputs it likes, like the little flag comes up telling you, oh, particle source, there's collisions, force, or surface attractors. So probably a particle source, my circle, and I'll put that in there.
But a particle source can be any kind of geometrical object?
Yeah,
okay.
anything that has a point at least.
So it's just the object, not actually the generator.
Right, it's the source, the emitting source, which is just the, like if I just have 2 points in space and I put them in as the first input, then this will be where the particles come from. Now, if we, I'm just going to zoom in and I'm going to remove the palette here because I don't need it right now. Zoom in and I enable the viewer for my sub by clicking the little cross here in the bottom. There's also a shortcut for that. If you hit A, you select the node and hit A, it will enable the viewer for that node. And now you can look at what these particles do. And weirdly enough, you have the guide here in the center, which tells you which direction things are in space. And you see that these particles are all coming towards you. They're traveling towards Z. And that's not necessarily what I want, right? I want my particles to shoot out in all directions from the circle. But I'm not really sure why that actually is. The initial velocity on particles in TouchDesigner, on the particle sub, is, so velocity, how quickly they are being shot out, and with what force they're being shot out, is determined by the point normals of the source geometry. So we should have a look here with the circle and see what the normals look like of the circle. So that's a little bit, in 3D modeling you have normals. I'm not a modeler for myself. I can, well, you'll see tomorrow how far my modeling goes. But there's like some concepts and some, if you remember those, then you get pretty far. For example, so I turn on the viewer of the circle sub and right-click into the node and bring up the display options dialog. And then I select points and point normals. And you should see something like this now. Like your circle has the blue dots for all its points, and these lines, which is the indication for where the normals are pointing to in space. So I see that all these normals are actually pointing towards me in Z. Now there's a couple ways how I can change those. And again, you need to, when you look at, usually what I do, if I need to put in nodes, I just right-click on the output of a node. So I'm gonna, like what I'm now trying to do is that these particles gonna spray out sideways from the circle and not come towards me. So that means I have to change the normals. Those are point normals. Now I can look for an appropriate, like there's no normal sub. But there's a point sub, and maybe the point sub has the right options to do this. I'll insert a point sub here into the, that's why I right-click there on the output of the circle. and bringing up the parameters by hitting P if they're not already up in your file. I see that there's actually things here: keep weight, keep color, keep normal, keep texture, and these are a little bit funny menus here. It indicates that this keep is keep normal is a menu, and you see that there's also an add normal. So I can add normals or change normals here. Now the problem here is that I would have to do this with Python or with a script, and I wrote that down if you're interested in this, because you have to do, you have to do really complicated stuff. Math.cosine, like imagine a circle, and the mathematical representation of every point on a circle is in x it's a cosine, and in y it's a sine. So you would have to do all of these things here, but so you would have to assign like a cosine on each point index divided by something else. So I don't really want to do that actually, so I just want to delete it. An easier way might be, because we saw that earlier, that you have all these point information and that you can convert it into different forms. Like you can take subs and make this into chops. And so I said, like the mathematical way to do this would be to take the sine of each point and the cosine of each point. Now, amazingly, I'm just going to click somewhere here inside the network, hit tab, and bring up sub2 chop. And now drag the circle sub onto the sub parameter of the sub2 chop. This is always, even if you write it, it gets funny. And what you end up with is, well, this is a nice sine here, and this is a nice cosine, because you wanna have a chop, like a channel representation of all the points. You can also, that's another one, if I middle mouse click here and go to the chop, I think Greg showed that. So basically touch, or the op_create dialog knows which nodes might fit to this in this conversion thing. That's why now you just see 2 chops suddenly, or you see like 1 top. And so you can also do this, and it fills it in for you. So there's 3 ways there to create this sub2 chop. Okay, so I have this, and what I would like to do with this data is, this is basically how my normals should look like. They should look like a circle, like they should point outwards like a circle. So how do I get these channels back onto a sub? Is via a chop2 sub. So, all right. Because I just had a sub2 chop, so now I need a chop2 sub. This is going to be fun. So select, right click on the output of the circle and select the chop2. All right, that's something that Ben was mentioning earlier, or showed you already. We have the parameters for the chop2 are very similar to the parameters for the sub2, except that previously the parameter was called sub, because the sub2 chop expected a sub, while the chop2 sub expects a chop. I'm getting better at this.
What?
And the other thing, and it's not really necessary in this particular case, but just for better form and for keeping with, like, training yourself, append a null to the sub2. And now we probably can do it exactly this way as we just discussed. We can take the null one and just drag it onto the chop2. By that we... Oh, the chop2 is in the... if you right-click on the output of the circle, and then type chop, it should, like ch already brings up only the chop2. And then hit enter, and you get the node. And then drag the null one onto it, and it fills it in. Now, currently, the default for the chop2 sub is that it has the channel scope. Channel scope, which channels of the chop do I want to use? So you see here tx, ty, tz. It says in the parameters tx, ty, tz, perfect match. Attribute scope is p0, p1, p2. If you click here, you see that p on the little extra menu here, you see that p is point position. So basically, right now it's not doing anything. Every point in my circle that goes into the chop2 is assigned exactly the position that it already has. So nothing is happening. Like I'm going in a circle right now, right? The point position of the circle is converted into a sub2 chop. So I have the x position of each point and the y position of each point and the z position of each point represented as a channel data. Now I'm feeding it back into the chop2 into the point position, so nothing is happening. But down here I have the point normals as well. So I can assign these channels to the point normals. N, yeah. Okay, it's an additive menu, like it just adds to the end, so I want to remove the P0, P1, P2. Okay. The color of the circle changes, as Ben mentioned. The normals really affect how the lighting works on this circle. So the lighting is off. But what I see right away in my particle sub, so if I select the particles and I hit A to activate the viewer and now look around, now I see, oh, my particles are now shooting outwards. That's exactly what I wanted. So by changing the normals, you can control how the particles, like where they're going basically, how they're being ejected, or whatever that's called. Now, how much more can I affect this, actually? Let's say, I said earlier that the normal really controls the initial velocity. Would that mean that if I increase the value of these tx, ty, tz channels, that this will also have an effect on the particles? Well, we can try this out by right-clicking on the output of the sub21 and inserting a math chop. Okay. And the math chop, I mean, the math chop is like the fundamental chop to do any basic math with it. So if I want to multiply values, I'm going to use a math chop. So here, now I'm going to watch my particles, what's happening with them, and increase on the math chop the multiply parameter. And I see that my particles are shooting out much more wildly or very little, like they don't even travel that far. I don't have the ability in my, the particle needs like a velocity, an initial velocity, and this it only gets from the normals of the input of the particle source. It's true, I should have explained that looking at the forces, for example, there is, I have external forces, but they're directional. So I can say, all right, I'll apply, let me just skip this here, the chop2. This is, by the way, that's the bypass flag. If you hit the bypass flag, the node does nothing. It's just there. So now I'm back at my particles flying towards me. I could try to to control my particles with these forces here, but they go either in X or in Y or in Z, and it's difficult to give them the shape that I want, basically, with the forces that I have available, or turbulence, which goes only up and down, left and right. And for the particular thing that I wanted to get, it's a circular emitter that expands outwards in a uniform fashion.
I think also you were asking how fast they come out. There's no speed parameter on the particle soft. There's no speed up and down. So by doing the multiply down here, you can make them come out faster or slower.
Right. Yeah. There's no velocity.
I don't think there's no speed yet.
So, okay, we have this. So as you see, we can. What do we do? Right. Correct. Just gotta put that back to 1. Here, my math 1 shop.
Back to 1?
Yeah. And to finish my particle system for the meantime, I just want to render it. So the rendering step, Ben also explained that we need 4 things. We need a geometry comp, a camera comp, a light comp, and a render top. So the render top is this place where it's also more of a conversion, right? You take 3D data and you put it into pixels, into complete 2D. The geometry comp is a little bit a funny one because it's a component where you put things inside, but it's necessary to render stuff. I don't really want to put stuff inside. I find that too complicated. So I'll build my networks more flat in that way. So I'll take a shortcut via what the create menu provides me. So I right-click on the particle sub, the output of the particle sub, and choose a geometry component. So on the first tab here, put it down, and it creates an input. Actually, also creates an output, but that can be disregarded. What it does inside, it sets a render flag to the right sub, so that it indicates, oh, I should be rendered by the outside render top. So I have the geometry, add a camera, comp, add a light, and finally bring up the upgrade menu, go to tops, and find the render. And I see nothing. With P, I'm just going to take out the parameters so I see more, and I'm going to click the display flag for the render 1. Now you can see here there's black stuff flying around, which looks very close to our particles. Why are they black? Well, they don't actually have any, they're just particles. There's nothing to them really. What I will need is, in a 3D system, is something like a material. So what I'll do is, I'll bring up the off-create dialog and go to one page that we didn't cover at all, which is the mat, which stands for materials. And because it's flat particles, I'm just going to pick the constant material. So what the constant material is, it assigns a color to all the geometry. There's actually not much lighting involved in that. It's just everything every object, every geometry gets this flat color. It's totally flat, shaded. Actually, I don't even need the light for this thing, so I'm just going to delete the light again because it's a constant mat. Now, the constant mat is not assigned to anything. Like, there's no connection between this material and the particles or the geometry or the render. And where it fits in is that the geometry component that we created. If I bring up the particles by selecting the Geo1 component and hitting P, well, this is recipe. On the render page of the geometry, you will find a material parameter. And that's where I drag the constant onto. And now my particles are white.
Drag the constant to the material.
Right, the material parameter on the geometry. And I mean, this is a very, very simplistic material here. I've got a color and an alpha, a color map as well. Color map, if you, let's say, if you want to shade a rectangle and you just give it a constant matte, then you could put a movie as the color map, and then the movie would show up on the rectangle. So you can save, like we have created the most basic particle system with particles that are spraying outwards, and we're rendering it. So that's a good step forward.